when we were looking at the Pittsburgh smiley face killer cluster, I mean, you got like one of the guys, Dakota James. It was his mother. I want to say Pamela James, I think is her name. She went in. She talked to the DA, who had a Secret Service officer there, as well as an FBI agent.
Interesting.
Weird, right? Why was
What's
the
that
Secret
about?
Service? Somebody reached out to me on Twitter, I think through Mark Claire, actually.
Okay.
Reached out to Mark Claire, had Mark reach out to me, said that his dad was the Secret Service agent. I've never been able to get in contact with the guy. I've tried, but and then I have another guy who commented, and again, I can't corroborate these. I'm just saying, like, these are the things that I get, and they could be total lies.
Same, yep.
But another guy who comes and he's like, hey, I'm a Pittsburgh resident. I have a buddy who's a detective in the Pittsburgh Police Department, and he says they do think there's a serial killer, and they're just telling the public there isn't.
Wow.
Because they don't know what to do about it.
And they're afraid of the fear and the
yeah,
backlash.
but here's the thing is, like, when I say these things, I have to always make give the disclaimer that I have been unable to corroborate that. But I do find it interesting that I finally start talking about this and somebody comes forward with such a personal story. Because that's, saying, I have a friend who goes to school at Pitt and they know somebody who was friends with Dakota at Duquesne. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that I don't want to deal with. But somebody comes to me and says, hey, my best friend's a detective and he says you're right. That's when I want to have a conversation with somebody. But also those people want to be careful about their names and who they are. And, yeah, but it's so much of it is ego. So much of it is a lack of manpower. And I think that honestly, if you're you're never going to properly catch up with all of it.
No.
The best thing that you can do is, hey, listen, if you're a police department and you can't solve that case, ask somebody for help. I don't care if it's the FBI, the state investigative agency. I don't care if you go and find, Sam and Colby from YouTube and have them come in and check it out. Like, do something.
Egos, and if they can't do it, then why would they ask for help?
I've noticed, because my initial reporting for the serial killer, and we're going to get to some super chats and to the callers real soon.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I love this, dude. I'm really enjoying this conversation.
I do think your mic might be working now, so we might switch if you need me to.
I don't know. Is it?
If you look at the screen on your left, when she talks,
say something, Alex.
Well,
it was working.
If you and I aren't talking, yours should be in the red.
Say something, Alex.
Okay, hi. How you doing?
Nothing.
You getting anywhere near the red?
No. There's nothing.
Then yeah, it's not working.
He can hear me.
Oh, weird.
Wait, maybe you're just quieter? I don't know.
I love it, but
I don't know.
So my initial reporting for the Long Island case, since I was getting strong armed by the authorities, and rightfully so, like, what am I going to do?
Right.
I fell in with a whole crowd of web sleuths.
Yeah.
And there's a whole...
Like the website
the
web
actual
sleuths?
web sleuths, yeah. And
I use them a lot. I don't take them at face value. I use them for sources.
well, like we were talking about journalists and anything, or cops, whatever. There's a spectrum of trust, distrust, and I had to parse through for weeks and months to see who I could actually talk to. And you can see people's history and how much they've been talking on certain cases. And you can build a certain case on why you should be talking to this person. But I mean, web sleuths have helped solve murder cases, and the cops have been weary, understandably, to work with them. But then you can point to certain cases where, like, I don't know if you remember the story we talked about it at one point in the serial killer case, about some guy being murdered who won the lottery and was murdered by, I think, like an ex or something, and she poured concrete and put him in the concrete.
Jeez.
Yeah, and then the web sleuths helped find her. She was commenting on the forum.
Oh, right,
Yeah.
And
Well, that's the thing is, serial
her.
killers will insert themselves into the investigation thinking they can derail it.
Yes.
Serial killers, it's usually because they're like, I want to watch.
It's a power play.
But the average person who kills their boyfriend is going to try and throw off the trail.
Right.
That's why you always look closely at the people who insert themselves in.
It's a disinformation campaign.
When I
for
say
them.
the web sleuths thing, it drives me insane because that exact term, web sleuths, was used in a Philadelphia Inquirer article when they announced that, their journalists had uncovered the identity of the parents of the boy in the box, a 65-year-old cold case of a murdered child in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This was 2 weeks after our video that we released on the boy in the box, where a person from an international investigative agency based in Philadelphia called the Vidocq Society called me personally to tell me right church, wrong pew about my conclusion.
What?
And then the Inquirer comes out and says, Inquirer journalists, along with the aid of web sleuths, were able to uncover, and I'm like, you didn't do anything.
Wait.
And I'm in your back. We were literally 15 miles from Philadelphia.
Wow. Where can people find that video?
It's just the boy in the box on our channel. Yeah, if you look at the boy in the box.
That's
I'll give you a
crazy,
heads
dude.
up. My hair is terrible.
Perfect.
I look horrible.
Awesome.
Yeah. But no, so
Looking forward to it.
And listen, what that meant, right church, wrong pew, is that I had what I think it meant at the end of the day. I had pegged the wrong member of the family as his dad. I think it was the guy I had pegged. It was his brother.
Wow.
It was something like that.
Wow.
I can't remember the exact situation, but yeah.
That's
or it was
incredible.
either that or that, like, yeah, I think it was Augustus Zarelli was his dad.
Wow.
If I remember correctly, but
Dude, that stuff is. I know. I've been consumed by the serial killer thing because it's in the news again, and I'm confident that I found someone who's a murderer, and maybe the serial
you're
killer.
like, what can you do about it?
And I reported to the feds 10 years ago because it's the most insane violent posts, and like I could go back to the late 90s and find these posts on this website, Utopia Guide, and no one ever got back to me until recently.
You should come over on our show and we can talk about that case specifically.
Yeah, it's a crazy case.
You can call in, or if you want to make the drive.
I will. Yeah, I'd love to. And just recently, the homicide detective was like, "So, what's up with this website?" And I was like, "Finally, dude! Like, I've been trying,
man."
I mean, and I told him, like, dude, I might have just found something this stuff is not unique to the world of prostitutes and shitty men, you know. But it's that specific part of Long Island, and the women they found in Gilgo Beach were known on that website. So it's like not such a reach.
Yeah.
And then they recently released documents from the suspect who's been in jail for like a year now, but like only charged with murders, but obviously no trial date yet. His documents, they sound so much like this crazy guy, like down to like abbreviations, because he would use things to either throw off internet searches, spell things wrong, or use certain abbreviations just for whatever. And he was a well-known architect in the city.
Interesting.
Crazy story.
Yeah.
So let's turn to how should we do this? Should we?
Sure. No. Well, the mic's not working, so.
I don't know if it's not working on his end, but they can hear you, then it's fine.
Can we do Discord?
Okay, but I'm gonna have to do it. So this is what I'm gonna do.
Let me do super chats real quick, and then
Okay, so
we'll go. So
I want to see if I can, because I don't want to overrule Chris if he's able to hear you. So I'm gonna pull it up myself.
Okay, so guys, I'm gonna read some super chats again. Thank you for these super chats. These are our first super chats. This is amazing. I am grateful. What a crazy, chaotic episode for you guys to be sending us super chats. I'm sitting from Alex's chair. Alex is in mine. Aidan's chilling after doing like a good 45 minutes of doing some crazy troubleshooting. Anyway, Turkey Baster's back. Sorry I have to read my name again. No problem. Too lazy to try and change it. Hannah Claire hates it. Anyways, this is the crossover episode I needed. Also, will Aidan give us a quick anthropology lesson? I don't know if you heard that.
Anthropology lesson?
Aidan's doing. We'll come back to that though real quick.
Yeah, no, I can only hear her through our mics.
Okay.
That's what I was checking.
Thank
Sorry.
you. No.
I just want to make sure.
Turkey Baster asked if you can give us a quick anthropology lesson.
I did see. I think they were okay with the 2 a day story.
Okay.
But yeah, quick anthropology lesson. All right. Cool. So around 8,000 BC, we came up with agriculture. That's the way it currently works. That's what we think. Before then, we were hunter-gatherers. Small-scale agriculture. We're talking about, cultivating, river reeds and wild grasses, things like that.
Yep.
And the belief has been that for a couple hundred years of archaeology, that like big structures, civilization, monuments, that kind of stuff, always follows agriculture. Across the world, every single civilization, every single time, you do not get monumental architecture until you have agriculture.
Right.
Except at Gockley Tepe in Turkey, which is 11,600 years ago, 9,600 BC, predates agriculture in the region by about 1,600 years, and it shouldn't. There's no reason that should be there.
So, how do you feel about it? Are you an anti?
I think that it in at least some way rewrites the current paradigm of human history, at least in the region.
And you believe that it would?
I
like
think
you think that theory is correct? Like what Corsetti's saying is correct?
No, I think Corsetti is one of the most wrong people to ever be wrong.
Have you talked to him?
I hate him.
Oh man.
Oh yeah.
I want to make peace with all of you guys and everybody.
No, I tried to play fair. I tried to play nice with Corsetti, and he just like. He straw manned me and blocked me on Twitter.
Is it because,
and then unblocked me to respond to something, then blocked me again.
Is it because you're attempting to critique their narrative that they're just so entrenched in, like the Ashen thing? Like because it's like you're saying something that takes away from it, and they can't, and he can't respond, or
with Jimmy specifically, I think my personal opinion is that Jimmy Corsetti is a grifter and that he knows it.
Oh man, I like Jimmy. I like what I do like.
That's fine. I'm not going to dislike you for liking Jimmy.
I hope not. Don't hold me accountable.
This is, and by the way, this is a very recent opinion. I did not pay a ton of attention to Jimmy. Right. I saw him on Rogan a couple of times. Yep. I was like, I think you're wrong about the Rashad structure and all that.
Right.
But I was always polite about it. And he posted something, and I quote tweeted him. I was like, hey man, I agree with you in general. I disagree with some of the details here. Would you be willing to come on our show? Or we'll go on yours, either one. We both have platforms and we can talk this through. No response. And then I respond to another thing. I quote tweeted another thing he said, and I was like, I don't always agree with Jimmy, but I think he's right on this, because he was criticizing how the archaeological community just kind of makes the excuse of we don't have any funding to do that. It's like, okay, well, go ask Elon Musk. I guarantee you, if you showed Elon Musk a weird underground structure and said, "Can I have $10 million?" He'd be like, "Oh yeah, here you can have that. I would like to know. I would just like to come and see it." That kind of thing. But they won't. And I was like, yeah, I agree with you there.
Yeah.
And then no real response. And finally, he tweeted something that I was just overtly critical of because it was just wrong. Like he took something.
What was it? Do you remember?
It had something to do with the amount of Gockley Tepe that's been excavated.
Okay.
And he was like, it's only 5% or it's only 10%. And I was like, okay, what you're trying to argue here, I forget the entire argument he made. You can find it on my Twitter. It's a couple weeks back. But if you look up Jimmy on my Twitter page, you should find it. But I just kind of was like, okay, this is what you're doing here is irresponsible. This is lying. You are deliberately omitting information about the situation, and you're doing it to drive engagement. And the problem is you're now driving your followers by doing this, and you're aware it's going to happen, and you've made no attempt to stop it. You're aware by naming these archaeologists that you are going to drive harassment towards them.
Right.
And that's what I had a problem with, because I've had a lot of clashes with archaeologists. I'm a historian.
Right.
So for me, I kind of tend to feel that archaeologists can be a little too rigid, right?
Oh, yeah. I got a story for you about that, too.
Yeah, but for me, I look at documents. I look at myths and all of that.
Let me ask you this real quick, then, because I'm wondering if you think there's a similar situation. We talk about the missing plane, right?
Yeah.
Do you think, then, if you don't agree with what Corsette is saying about certain things, do you think there's anything to the idea of like the ancient civilizations at all?
100%.
It doesn't have to be Tartaria, but like maybe what Graham Hancock and them were saying.
So Graham's the one who got me into it.
Yeah.
His stuff on Rogan is the stuff that really made me interested in all of this.
One of the greatest episodes, I think.
He's got so many good ones with
Graham.
Yeah.
One of the early ones.
Just very interesting, because even if you don't take everything Graham says at face value, go look into it. It's still interesting.
And
stuff.
the bigger guy too. I always forget his name. Russell?
Randall Carlson.
Yeah. Like, there's some wild things. So
yeah, they're fun guys.
Do you think there's something to those theories?
Yes. So again, this is another place where like I don't agree with Graham completely on everything, but
he's an atheist too.
I've looked at
it's okay.
But I've looked into what he said, and there's some things that I'm like, okay, that's interesting, and others that I go, all right, well, I don't know about those. We have 2 videos on this too.
Okay.
They're both from I think last summer.
Okay.
If you scroll back to those, they're both Ancient Apocalypse labeled. But yeah, so with Graham's stuff, I find myself more in line with where he is today as opposed to where he was in the 90s. Back then, you see a little bit more stuff about, ancient like super technologies and things like that. Ancient astronauts, those things.
Yep.
I agree that I think that human civilization is older than we think it is. Yeah. I don't necessarily agree that there's been a continuous human civilization or that there was just one. Right. And I really don't think they had skyscrapers,
Right.
But what I will look at, what I will consider is the fact that Gockley Tepe is 1,600 years too old. That's way too old to be a coincidence. Right. That's not, oh, well, maybe these guys were 150 years ahead of the guys 200 miles south of them. No, this is 1,600 years ahead of the rest of what happens in the region. Yeah. That seems wrong to me. And these are not hunter-gatherer structures. Right. And what I find odd about it, what bothers me, I'm not going to go so far as to say, hey, there was an ancient civilization, there was an Atlantis. I'm open to the possibility of a late Neolithic, maybe a Copper or even early Bronze Age level society that existed sometime, during maybe right before or, during the Younger Dryas period. Yeah. We get interesting stories from the Zoroastrians about how instead of a flood, the Zoroastrians have stories, and this is also really interesting because Zoroastrianism, while it comes from the Middle East, is almost certainly an Indo-European religion because it's Persian. Right. And Persians, even Iranians today, are Indo-Europeans. Right. So the flood stories from Babylon, from Canaan, from Egypt, from the Israelites, obviously, those are all Semitic. Yeah. That's a different... And, again, obviously linguistics and ethnicity are not the same, but they are very closely linked. We even talk about linguistics in genealogical terms, like language families, genetics of a language. Zoroastrians, Indo-European. Around the time that flood would have been happening, if it happened, they would have been much further north, up in the Caucasus. Right. So their story, rather than being a flood, is that 2/3 of the world were covered in ice from the top and the bottom. So their version, very different.
Yeah.
And it involves glaciers.
Interesting.
And they talk about going underground to survive them.
Interesting.
That right there is like, I think, some of the best cultural evidence that something weird happened. Because what would a group of people living in the northern third of the world experience during the Younger Dryas? Extreme glaciation. What would people living near waterways in the tropics feel? They would feel floods. They would get humidity. They would get storms. So you have two things that both talk about a time when humans were, we had become too arrogant. We were wicked. We were too successful. We were overpopulating. Whatever the reasoning is, there's always some human cause. And then we have an event with a whole bunch of water, and then civilization restarts. And we get this from two cultures. Keep in mind, a lot of people like to say that, oh, well, Judaism changed a lot after the Babylonian captivity because they encountered Babylonian stories. And it's like, first of all, they had the Babylonian stories the whole time. They were all Semites. Like the Canaanites had very similar stories to the Babylonians. This is not, that's not what happened there. That's not, I just don't agree with that one. But I completely lost my train of thought.
Talking about two different cultures.
Yeah, two different
underground.
Yes, right. So
ice, then
the Jews.
Yep.
The Jews would not have encountered the Zoroastrians until the Babylonian captivity.
Okay.
Their stories, we know, are older than that meeting. We have Gilgamesh from, that story starts to take shape in 2100 BC and then is kind of completed around, I think, 1200, 1100 BC. That Gilgamesh story involves a flood. The Zoroastrians, who date their religion back to, I think, 2200 BC, coming again from further north, well, theirs is different. So the way I see this is like, these can't be relying on each other. Maybe there's a possibility, but it seems more likely to me that these are describing the same event from two different perspectives. I think that's what we need to be looking at. And that's where the archaeologists, I think, miss it, because the only people who are going to look at that are going to be anthropologists and historians. Archaeologists don't care about that.
So it's kind of like the spy satellite version from the MH370.
Yeah.
There's
something in there that we need to look at.
And then for me, my problem is, like we were saying earlier with trusting sources, for me with ancient history, even looking at stories is very hard.
There's no such thing as an ancient historical fact.
Right. There's not a thing as even a somewhat recent historical fact. I mean, because, today people look at the news from almost like they're interdimensional, with their own perceptions. But I'm saying, like, I've written books about the Civil War, and that breaks apart so many narratives. If you just look at certain firsthand accounts, which again, they're just firsthand accounts, and everyone's skewed from their whatever prism they're looking at it from. But if you look at a lot of those and put them together, that breaks apart the larger narrative of a lot going on with the war, or who's a good guy or what's good and bad. Even something as simple as that, right? Like people like Sherman, or the March to the Sea.
There's a lot of nuance for basically every general involved in that conflict.
Yeah, and it's hard to know what to do with that stuff, the stuff that's the ancient history stuff for me, and that's why I love listening to it and I love hearing about it, but I get very skeptical when someone tells me that they're certain about things from that far back. And this is the thing. I know I keep saying we're going to go to caller soon, and I'm going to stop, but I love this conversation. Is like, I did this story once where there was a skeleton in my town was disturbed because some guys were working on the rock wall. They were hired to work on the rock wall. The wall collapsed and it pushed up the grave. Okay. And it was like in prime real estate grave. The grave belonged to someone named Margaret Corbin. Okay. She's like a Revolutionary War hero, right? Her story is...
Was she one of the Molly Pitchers?
Here we go. Perfect, because Molly Pitcher in Pennsylvania.
One of my buddies has an ancestor who may be the original Molly Pitcher.
We got to talk. So, Margaret in our town, this is like near West Point in New York. She's got this great real estate, great grave. The Daughters of the American Revolution dug her up from a previous grave in Highland Falls, the town next door, and put her in West Point, where she would be disturbed way later.
Because you would think that would be the safer place.
Yeah, safer. And they also were like, this is great for promotion. So when the bones came up, they were like, we should just study them real quick before we put them back. And they're like, oh, wait, this is a dude. This is a dude from the 1800s or like mid 1800s, which just didn't add up, and also didn't have the wound she was supposed to have. Molly Pitcher or Margaret Corbin's story was that she was shot with grape shot by the British after her husband died at a cannon. and she took over the canon
Right,
as a
yeah.
patriot, right? So she was a prisoner of war, and then she was released. And in my version of the story, she came back to West Point. However, through all this research, is like for people out there who like doing this type of stuff, some of your best friends could be historians from little towns because they have they hopefully have amassed all the information.
Oh, small town historical societies are one of the best sources of information.
So I would spend 8 hours a day for weeks just combing through, and I found the letters from the 1800s, from the Daughters of the American Revolution. I think it was a superintendent of West Point and a local church.
Right.
And they were all dealing with Margaret's, her body being moved from one place to West Point. And they were like, hey, so we heard she was from Ireland at this point. And they're like, well, we heard she was from Pennsylvania at that point. And I'm watching them through the letters construct her history.
Right.
And now there's other people being like, well, we heard she was Molly. From this place.
Yep.
And they were, well, we heard she was Margaret. And okay, nope, she's this, and that. That's the story. Dig
Could
her
have
up.
easily been Maggie that turned into Molly too.
Exactly.
Like,
And if you're driving through Jersey or Pennsylvania or New York, you'll see like rest stops named after Molly Pitcher or Margaret Corbin or Molly Corbin or Molly, whatever. There's like so many different ways of putting her name.
I know a lot of when I was in a grad school class on the American Revolution, one of the theories was that it was basically like the term Molly Pitcher was the term the soldiers gave to the women who were doing what Margaret Corbin was doing.
I believe that.
Yeah, which I think is coming from the historical background. That's where I see
I think that's what happened, and then people made it. They not manifested. They made it a story that they could put a face to create a history to attach themselves to the revolution. It was almost like taking debris from 9/11 and putting it in the middle of your town. Yeah, because they're like, we need to make it's a tourist attraction.
It could have begun as this is our town's Molly Pitcher, our Molly Pitcher, and then that becomes Molly Pitcher.
Right.
And if you're from a small town, especially up until like the internet area, you're not going to know that every town has a Molly Pitcher.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that person probably had a different name, and they were called Molly Pitcher because you know, the soldiers on the battlefield who were mostly farmhands and people who worked in shops in the cities who are like, they don't know what to call the woman. So they're like, what's a common name for the era and what's she carrying?
Just that's it.
Hey, Molly with the pitcher.
Yep.
Molly O pitcher.
Yep.
Like and honestly, that's probably what it was. Now that I'm thinking about it, thinking about the timing, the Irish, I'm like, they were probably calling her like, Molly of the Pitcher, then Molly O Pitcher, then Molly Pitcher.
And I think the Daughters of the American Revolution saw her as a symbol for suffrage, for the suffragette movement. And then they believed in the story, in the myth. And then they found a guy who was the son of the boat captain who was supposedly at her funeral, right? And then they went and dug up the wrong body.
Yep.
That original grave is now under a sewage plant. And I went with them with LiDAR or whatever, the land radar stuff. Yeah. There's nothing to do. Because you can, I have pictures of her funeral. Or is it pictures? No, I have pictures of the exhumation.
Yeah.
And because there wouldn't have been pictures from the funeral. I have pictures of the exhumation. I can see the tree line, but where they're standing for that open grave, that's a sewage plant.
Yep.
And
then there's nothing you can do at that point.
Nothing you can do about that. Yeah. So
all of those bodies were probably exhumed already and moved, and you're never going to be able to find who was where.